I have tried to make this intro 3 or 4 times. I have made this video twice, and I just do not like how much of a yapathon I keep going on it. So, I'll just start. In another video, I talked about how I actually wanted to go more in depth on the Bible when I was talking about faith and all of that. And originally the plan was to just finish the Old Testament, so the Tanakh, and then talk about it from there. But every time I made the video about Genesis, I realized, like, oh my god, this video is gonna be 10 fucking hours if I did it like that. Over 10 hours. So I said, okay, I'm going to split it chapter by chapter. And when I mean chapter by chapter, I mean relatively chapter by chapter. So Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Numbers, and all that, they will have their own separate thing. But if I do like the shorter chapters, like Ruth, I think, and all that, will probably be lumped in with the chapter before or the chapter after it, just so I can kind of keep a decent thing, so I don't make like a video about Ruth that's like 5 minutes or something like that. Because what I was originally doing was I was kind of talking about the story and then giving my thoughts on it, but doing that was very, very slow because I felt like I was going a chapter by minute, but I actually wasn't, because I kept cutting and stopping and then talking about something else. So anyway, today we'll be talking about the Bible, Genesis. Now, when it comes to it, Genesis is actually one of the most read chapters from me, because I've listened to it, I think, twice, and I've read it 3 times, because I physically read it and I listened to it, and then I think I read it again not too long ago. And then I kind of skimmed through it just a few days ago to make sure that I knew what I was talking about the right thing. So I was planning to make a video that was specifically about Abraham. I was going to go about the biblical characters, which would eventually lead up to, I think, the last character I would have made was technically probably Muhammad in the Abrahamic faiths. So I was going to start with Abraham to like not Isaiah, but whoever's the last guy, Malachi or something, and then to Jesus and then Paul and whatever. Then it was going to be Muhammad. I don't know if I was going to do the other, like actually, if I was going to do Paul, I probably would have did the Muhammad's disciples or followers, whichever they're called. Do that. But I, as it currently stands, I do not know if I'm going to do that, because I realize that's going to be a long video too. I might do with the most important characters, so like Abraham, Jacob, Isaac, Jesus, Muhammad, whatever. But I don't know yet. By the way, that's not important to it. But there's one thing I said in the Abraham video, which isn't out, or I don't know if I'm going to make it, was that when it comes to Genesis specifically, or when I say Genesis, I mean the Torah, so the first 5 books, is that it feels so different to me. When it comes, especially Genesis, it feels very mythological, folklore type of thing, where there's a certain level of believability, as in, not believability, what I would say is more realism, as in this probably happened to an extent, but at the same time, it has been, I can't think of the word, it's been exaggerated, it's been mythologized. It will be the same way as that when it comes to I think it's one of the Caesars. I think it's the original Caesar, Julius Caesar, or Augustus, where there are real stories about the person. You know, that he's a real person, likely, well, definitely, I guess. But he's a real person, but there's also all these extra stories about him. Another example would be, I think this is a better example, is Alexander the Great. Where Alexander the Great, he's a real person, sure. And he did things. He conquered all the way into Persia. But was he the descendant of Zeus, or the son of Heracles, or the descendant of Heracles? Whichever was what you said. Or Hercules. Was that true? Probably not. It's more in the sense of that way. Or like Lothbrok, where he slayed a dragon or fought giant serpents. Lothbrok probably was a real person, but the stories are probably not true. And when it comes to Genesis, I do not really believe most of these characters are real, to an extent. I do kind of believe that when it comes to who wrote the first 5 books and all that, I do not believe that was Moses. I don't even think Moses was a real person. I do believe that there was someone equivalent to Ezra, if Ezra is a real person. Let's say hypothetically, we just use Ezra as a placeholder. I do believe that there is somebody who came and kind of made an amalgam of a lot of these folklore stories from the tribe, not the 12 tribes, but from the people who lived in Israel. Especially, I would say this was most definitely probably during the Babylonian exile. If that, I do believe that Babylonian exile probably did happen. We have enough record. I know this is very iffy because this would be like using the Egyptian history to say, okay, there was a kingdom of Israel. There were the Hebrews or the Jews or whatever. But what I'm saying is, the first 5 books, I just don't believe is real. I do not believe Abraham is real I believe he's real to an extent. To an extent, I believe Abraham is real. I do not believe Isaac is real. And to an extent, I don't even believe Jacob is real or the 12 tribes. It's very iffy, but I do believe to an extent Abraham existed. And even though this might sound contradictory to what I just said, I do believe Jacob might be real. One or the other or both. I do not believe Isaac is a person. And I do not believe that, or just those people, Adam and Eve, I don't believe they're real people either. Or Seth or Noah or any of those people. And when I'm saying this is, it's not because there's a lack of information about some of these characters, because Abraham has a decent amount of story written about him. Because then if I said that because Abraham had a decent amount of chapters dedicated to him, so he's real, then I would have to say Moses is real, which would be kind of hypocritical to what I just said. But yes, I do believe Abraham and Jacob, they're figures that fit those people. I do not believe they're real people, is what I'm saying. It's the same situation with like Muhammad, for example, right? Muhammad was a real person, right? But did he split the moon? Did he travel to Jerusalem in the night? Probably not. Is what I'm trying to say. And when it comes to it, right? To Genesis, when you read it, and I'm talking about like not reading it in the context of you being Jewish or being Christian or even Muslim or anything like that, or taking it as being literal or real. There's a lot of goofy-ish stuff that kind of happens in the story, and when you read it more from the context of a historical lens, some stuff kind of just doesn't really. Well, there's stuff that makes more sense when you read it like that. For example, when it comes to Lot, which is Abraham's nephew or cousin, I can't remember off the top of my head, is one of them. When him and his daughters, which have no names, leave Sodom and Gomorrah, and it's destroyed, you get this story of Lot's 2 daughters making Lot get drunk and then having sex with him, raping him, and them having kids, which are the sons of Ammon, the sons and it'll be the sons of Ammon, Moab, who are the Moabites, and Ben-Ami, which is the sons of Ammon. And when you read it and then not necessarily take it as literal, but kind of get a different interpretation of it, since I don't really believe the Bible is literally true, it's like a propaganda. It's almost like a propaganda piece when you think about it from that context. When you think about it, it's like, oh, the Israelites, who are probably hundreds of years after this event, are saying, oh, you're descendants of incest. You're descendants of incest. Is probably what this is probably just supposed to be a joke, right? It's like you descend from incest. You descend from Lot and his daughters. When you think about it like that, it's like this is probably fucking propaganda. The entire story is probably just propaganda, especially when you go further back and when you're reading from the perspective of Noah with his 3 sons Shem, Japheth, and Ham. And then there's the Canaanites. The Canaanites are the ones who are supposed to be the ones who are enslaved, the ones who are supposed to dwell in the tents of their the tents of their brothers. Okay, I just reread the part so I can make sure I get it right. So it was actually Canaan, the son of Ham, because Ham saw Noah naked, so Noah cursed Canaan for some reason, even though Canaan wasn't there, to be a servant of Shem and Japheth. And actually, it was Japheth who was supposed to live in the tents of Shem. But that's not really that important. But actually, this is very important. that part of it being Ham, it wasn't very important. But you have to take into account was that we're reading from the lens of a group of people who were living in the key word here, the land of the Canaanites. The Israelites, if we're to let's just take the Bible as being just historical for a second. If we were to take what the Bible is saying, almost literally, the promised land, that is promised to Abraham is the in the land of the Canaanites. They are trying to justify their acts in Canaan, especially once you read Joshua of them burning, hypothetically, we don't really know, burning cities down, the destruction of Jericho, all these things. These are supposed to damn near being justified in Genesis. With they're your slaves. You're the descendants of Shem or Noah, but the Canaanites are descendant of Ham, and the Canaan and the Canaanites are your slaves. They're the slaves of Japheth and the slaves of Shem. And we know in Genesis, we know the genealogy that is written in Genesis, we I guess humanity is descendant of Shem, the first Shem before Noah, that's Noah's ancestor. And then the second Shem is Abraham's ancestor. So the Israelites descend from Shem, and the Canaan is the slave of Shem, or the Canaanites. So when you think about it like that, it starts to make more sense. And with the sons of Ammon, or the Ammonites, or the Moabites also being in, guess what, the land of Canaan. That is where when you really start to put two and two together, a lot of this is just fucking propaganda. A lot of this is propaganda. But ignoring the propaganda point for a moment, when you read Genesis, like I said, it reads more like mythology, more so than if you read the other parts of the Bible, especially after the first 5 books, after Numbers, I believe is after the last one, where God feels less hands-on in a lot of situations. He's still hands-on in certain parts of the book, but when it comes to the first 5 books, there's a lot more fantastical stuff more consistently. For example, and I'm damn much just going over the first 5 books, but I'm trying to stick with Genesis. I'm just gonna do Genesis for now. When it comes to what happens in Genesis I was gonna say Jacob's ladder, but that doesn't really matter because that could be considered a dream. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the angels popping up in Sodom, I think it was Sodom. Popping up in Sodom with Adam and Eve, the flooding of the world, and with Noah, and the Nephilim, which I believe pop up again in Chronicles, I believe, or Kings. I know it pops up in Joshua, but it pops up in I don't remember if Goliath is a descendant of the Nephilim. I don't remember if that's stated or people just believe that. But either way, a lot of fantastical things happen. God seems a lot more present once you get to like Daniel or not Ezra. I guess Ezra too. But once you get to the other books, God seems to be more speaking through people. I do believe that still happens in the first 5 books in the Torah, but it feels like it happens more. God is speaking through somebody, and then the latter parts of the books, comparatively to the first 5, where God seems to be a burning bush, the plagues in Egypt, all of these things that seem to happen in the book. Actually, screw it. We'll talk about the entire Torah, since I'm gonna cut out the story bits. And when it comes to Genesis, right? Back to Genesis, because I have to say back to Genesis. I was actually gonna jump to Exodus in a second. When you read certain parts, it really feels like this is happening much, much later. And I know people will say, oh, well, Moses is much, much later, or later comparatively to Abraham and Jacob and all that. But when you really think about it, that this is more than likely somebody trying to make all of the stories cohesive in a way. For example, when how Jacob got his name, Jacob became Israel, or got the name Israel. Ignoring the parts where it flip-flops between that, I do believe that's actually more thematic. Because that used to be a part of a thing that kind of annoyed me. I was like, why is he called Jacob and sometimes Israel? But when you read the other parts of the Bible, it kind of makes sense. It's like Jacob, your father, Israel, the blank, whatever. But it's whatever when you think about that. Like, when you think about it from that perspective. What I'm talking more about is Jacob gets his name twice, I believe, or 3 times. And so does Abram. Abram gets it twice because God tells him you will no longer be Abram. You'll be called Abraham after Isaac is born. And then a few chapters later, same thing. And with Jacob, I believe it is a chapter or 2 later. Ignoring what is said later in the book, because I believe that in the context of Genesis, ignoring what is written after the fact, Jacob saw God face to face, because Peniel, I have seen God face to face, or I have seen God's face. And when it comes to that, people will say, well, later in the book, it is said that Jacob saw an angel, but Jacob, the person who's there, said that he saw God face to face. But either way, when you read it, you really start to notice these are probably different groups of people who heard the story differently. Like I like to imagine like an Ezra, just like, oh my God, none of this shit works together. Like Ezra's like, what? So he did this, but there's also this. But this is mainly just a Genesis thing. when it comes to Exodus, as far as I know, when it comes to Exodus, because I can't remember. Obviously, I can't remember all of Exodus, 50 something chapters, or 60 chapters, or 40 chapters. One of those. It's a lot of chapters. So was Genesis, but Genesis felt a little bit easier to read because it felt more chronological in certain parts. But when it comes to Exodus, ignoring the evidence of Exodus is very iffy. It's very iffy. We don't really have any proof. For example, for even a Moses existing, or even the Israelites being in Egypt at all for an extended amount of time. I'm sure there was Hebrews or Jews or Israelites who were in Egypt. Obviously, they're right next to that land. That would be the equivalent of somebody from France never, like French people never being in Germany or something. Like, bro, they're right next to each other. And when it comes to that, we have no evidence of anything when it comes to an elongated amount of, not elongated, but a large group of people being in the Sinai for 40 years. And I find it almost impossible for somebody to be lost in the Sinai for 40 years. Unless you keep walking back and forth in a circle for 40 years, at least a couple Israelites would have eventually either ended up back in Egypt or would have been in the promised land. Because it's depending on how big it is, because obviously I believe that modern day Israel is probably bigger than the promised land probably was back then. They would have walked their way into the land, at least the land of the Canaanites. They would have at least walked their way into there. But it seems like everybody was lost there. Everybody seemed consolidated, unless stated otherwise. And the Red Sea being split, and like there's no large group of fucking soldiers or Egyptian soldiers stuck in the Red Sea. I'm sure there's dead soldiers in the Red Sea, but obviously not to the extent or the plagues of Egypt. Ignoring if Egypt even wrote it down, because maybe they didn't. Okay, we'll just assume that they didn't write any of that shit down. There's still no proper evidence of what frogs, locusts, and destruction of livestock, and then destruction of all livestock, and then the destruction of all livestock again. Even though you've already done it once, why are you doing it again? There's literally nothing there. It'll be me killing all the cows on a field and then saying I did it again. Like, bro, I did it already. I killed them all. There's literally nothing else to kill. Ignoring all of that and the plagues and whatever else, there's just not enough going on. I mean, of course, you're going to want to have some cool founding myth to how you got your land, right? Other than saying, well, the Canaanites are slaves, so we might as well just defeat them all. But either way, we just don't know enough about what the fuck they're talking about back then. And when it comes down to Deuteronomy, I believe it's Deuteronomy. It's Leviticus. So Leviticus 2 is one of my least favorite chapters in the Bible. Okay, I had to calm down because I was kind of going on and on and on. I do not want this video to be that long, so I gotta speed up. Leviticus is one of my least favorite chapters for one main reason, and that reason is how much certain people pander to the chapter for certain things while ignoring other parts. When I say this, I mainly mean Christians. They'll point to Leviticus about, oh, gay people is an abomination, while ignoring like the other hundreds of other hundreds of others sins and laws. They just say, oh, well, Jesus fulfilled it. Well, like, bro, how do you know what did he fulfill and what did he not fulfill? Like, can you eat shellfish? Can you eat things that chew the cud? Or why are you eating pig? Pig is also considered something that you should not be eating, right? But they still eat it, right? It's complicated because there's certain parts that people want to adhere to, and then there's other parts that people do not want to adhere to. That's why I kind of find Leviticus to be such an annoying read. I was like, dang, there's a lot of things that people just kind of skip over. And I'm not sure if this was in Leviticus with the Shabbat thing or Sabbath thing, where you're not supposed to use fire or electronics or whatever. Oh, I guess electronics is any sparks. You're not supposed to use any sparks. And there are Jews, I think it might just be Orthodox Jews or just Jews in general, who still observe that part of it, but Christians obviously do not, or certain Christians don't, or fasting and all that. It becomes very iffy, man. It becomes very iffy. But Leviticus is a long read of just laws upon laws upon laws. Obviously, I'm not Jewish, I'm not Christian, I'm not any Abrahamic faith. So reading these is like, dang, bro, there's a lot of stuff people probably have to follow that they kind of just ignore. So obviously the Torah, which it means like law in Hebrew, these are very important for like of the foundations of the religion, of more specifically Judaism than Christianity, but Judaism and Christianity, these are the most important parts. A little iffy. And obviously when people were reading these or being told about these thousands of years ago, of course it's going to make a lot of sense, because you can't you wouldn't be able to completely undergo like archaeology to know, oh, were our ancestors really in the land of Canaan or coming to the land of Canaan from Egypt? Like, there's no way you will be able to know that. Literally no way. That's kind of what I believe. Originally, this might be blasphemous as hell is what I'm about to say. The Israelites were Canaanites. I believe they were Canaanites, but I believe that they were a diverging portion of the Canaanites. Now, obviously, I do not know Canaanite language or how it was said or how it was written, but when we look at the Phoenicians, who were also in the land of Canaan, who would be in the land of Canaan geographically, and how their language and Hebrew is similar enough to each other, and then even Babylonian and other Semitic languages like Aramaic, we see similarities. And obviously we could do DNA tests on Jews and Canaanites, or people who are descendant of Canaanites, which would be like probably like Syrians and Palestinians or something, and we can see the similarities. Well, then again, there will be mixture between them because Jews and Canaanites were in the same area. And I believe in when we see Baal, which obviously would be referring to the Canaanite god or whatever, and even the name Yahweh being seen in Canaanite pantheons, I do believe that the Israelites, probably being pastoralists, relied more on Yahweh, a thunder god or wind god, I believe, and yes, he was a weather god, I believe. Well, I'm just gonna say weather god because probably thunder, wind, and lightning all that. They were pastoralists. They were, a lot of them probably were farmers and all that, and they would pray to the god that would help them. That is kind of how a lot of religions, like polytheistic religions, probably worked back then. I'm not going to say like Hinduism, because I don't know. Past polytheistic gods, they probably more so worshipped a specific god that would help them. For example, if I was a farmer, or we were farmers, which god would we be praying to? The god of war, the god of fire, or the god of wind? The god of the weather, the god of storms, the God who's going to bring us, who's going to help our harvest. That is what I believe what it originally started as. But then there came a point where they wanted to worship a specific God. Let's say there was a certain group. There's two groups. Let's just say there's two, for example. Let's say there's the Judah who worship, we're just going to use them as place names. That Judah who wanted to worship a singular God. But let's say it was Benjamin who was the ones who was worshiping multiple gods, but more specifically Yahweh. And then there's Ezra, who's from part of Judah, who's worshiping one God. Ezra can sit down and with his other scribe and just rewrite the story. You have to remember that people could not read that well back in the day. And even the Hebrew we read today is more than likely the priestly version of Hebrew, not the everyday version that people were talking. The way that people spoke. Obviously we don't really know. But you have to remember, there's most, like, it's the equivalent of like reading in Latin. Like people reading the Bible in Latin, but speaking English on a day-to-day basis, right? There's still some stuff you can take from Latin and English and say they're equivalent, but obviously there's differences. Or King James, this is better. Reading like the King James version with Shakespearean English, and then once you leave the church, you're speaking regular English. It would be the equivalent of that. That's kind of what I believe Hebrew kind of is today, especially like biblical Hebrew, where that's more like Shakespearean English and then modern English, which they're not the same, but you can read both. So, or obviously if you know modern English, you probably know a decent amount of Shakespearean English without having to pick up the book. When it comes to that, that's what I believe is kind of true. That the Israelites are Canaanites who broke away, and then maybe there was a portion of them that still worship multiple gods, but specifically Yahweh. And then there was the ones who only worshipped Yahweh or believed Yahweh was a god. Especially once you read into the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, you start to realize on multiple occasions they're worshiping multiple gods. The Israelites are worshiping other gods. Sometimes it's Baal, and then sometimes it's other gods. And a lot of times we're not told what those other gods are. They're just saying they're worshiping multiple gods. They're putting these statues or monoliths of other gods, but we're not really exactly told exactly what they are. I kind of believe that's kind of the case, that some people continue to worship multiple gods, but still might have worshipped a singular god in a way, to an extent what I believe. Now, people can, I might be wrong about this, but there's really no way you can really prove it, because even if we read the Bible, these are people, for example, my Ezra guy, these are people who were not there when these would have hypothetically been written. They were not there when Abraham would have hypothetically existed, or Jacob, or Isaac, or Adam, or Eve. They weren't there for any of these people. So as far as we know, we don't know how things were going. And I'm not going to say, well, we're going to look at the Dead Sea Scrolls and say, well, it says. I don't know. I mean, if you want to look at the Dead Sea Scrolls, there's sometimes where it's an implication that there's multiple gods. I'm not going to say God had a wife like Asherah or whatever that one guy said. I'm not going to say that. But I'm going to say is that I do believe the Israelites originally were henotheism or whatever it's called, where they recognize other gods, but they worship a specific one. I don't know, but I'm getting off. See, this is the problem. I do love talking about religion, and I kind of get off topic. I feel like it's really noticeable if I'm getting off topic, because like, bro, I was already yapping about something else. Either way, back to Deuteronomy, and just like Leviticus, I do not find Deuteronomy to be that good of a read. I'm gonna say it now, neither is Numbers. The first 5 books of Genesis, excluding certain parts, is extremely boring. Look, as a person who doesn't believe this stuff is true, it's really boring to read, but I do find it very interesting once you really have all the information and think about it. I don't believe I ever completely or properly read the New Testament, so I do believe it's going to be really interesting when I actually read it and talk about it. Let's get to the point. When it comes to Deuteronomy is a very interesting text. Is that it's saying, it basically comes down to obey my laws or you're going into slavery, especially when it comes to like Deuteronomy 25, I believe it's Deuteronomy 20, it's like 25 or 23, where it's like, but if you do not hold my commandments, then you're going to the land of Egypt. You're going to the land of Egypt, where you shall be brought back to Egypt in chains, and no one will buy you, and blah, 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 blah. Like, it's stuff like that. It's like, damn, bro, why? It's not that serious, bro. Because throughout the story, the Israelites continuously fail to worship one God, and I'm assuming they were brought back. I don't think they were ever really brought back to Egypt in slavery, technically. I mean Egypt was part of Rome at one point, and then Romans enslaved the Israelites. I mean, technically you can say they were brought back to Egypt in slavery, in chains, kinda. They were brought to Egypt in slavery, technically. Or you can kind of say it happened in Babylon too, but like, I don't even know. It's just so odd. It's so odd because it's weird. It's like it's as if your parents told you, okay, obey my laws or I'm going to send you to an orphanage or something. Like, it's kind of fucked when you think about it. But it's not that bad. Deuteronomy is not that bad. Oh, it's not even Deuteronomy, it's fucking Numbers. Oh my god. It's Numbers and then Deuteronomy. I always thought it was Deuteronomy and then Numbers, but it doesn't really matter, because Numbers is just the numbers of the people. Is getting a census of all the people. When it comes to the Numbers, I actually do kind of believe Numbers might be kind of real, because I don't think they're flubbing the numbers, but I just don't know, bruh. It's so hard to know how real some of this stuff is, because whatever, man. But yeah, I just find that the Bible is such an interesting read, and I do find that I might talk about the Ketuvim soon, or the Nevi'im, soon, because I'm technically near the end, or actually, since those are like, that's me talking from like the Tanakh. Talk about the next couple books soon, and this will probably be significantly more interesting than this. That's all I really wanted to talk about, was just how I really see the Torah part of the Bible, because to me it's very interesting, but it's very unbelievable in a lot of situations. And that if you take the Bible, there's one thing I kind of like, is that the interpretation aspect of it, even though it can be very, very bad from certain contexts. But if you take this book and take your own interpretation of it, as in, for my example, I'm taking this as people reading this to justify certain stuff, to kind of point people in a direction, Muad'Dib knows the way. Muad'Dib knows the way. That they're using it to point in a direction, like, these are your enemies, the Canaanites, the Ammonites, sometimes the Edomites, the Moabites, in the land of Canaan, or our promised land that was promised to our ancestor Abraham and Jacob, or whatever. They're using these as justifications for certain things. That I do believe the Torah, to an extent, is very heavy, or at least more specifically Genesis, when it comes to certain stuff. Joshua is the pinnacle of that. And when it's taken from that context of propaganda and laws to kind of govern the land, and using God or Elohim or whatever as that pointer, that it puts the Bible in a different perspective to me. As in, I don't know. Either way, that's all I wanted to say. I feel like I might come back and talk about Genesis so I can get a proper way of talking about it. But either way, that's all I wanted to say. See ya and have a good day.